evidence? So where's the beef on the UFO issue? In fact, we have so much evidence that Dr. J. Allen Hynek, who was in charge of Project Blue Book for the Air Force, stated that it's an embarrassment of riches. We have so much. Roswell's almost become a joke because there's so much myth and narrative around it. But if you look at the Guy Hotel document, it was a field agent sent to J. Edgar Hoover. 3 so-called flying saucers had been recovered in New Mexico. Each one was occupied by 3 bodies of human shape, but only 3 feet tall. It's become the #1 document viewed on the FBI website after we released this. The question is, who are people like Carl Sagan and before him Professor Donald Menzel? It turns out that Sagan, in his early career, actually spoke and wrote about UFOs in a way that was affirmative, that was legitimate. After he was threatened by the intelligence community and blackmailed, he then began to debunk the issue. Skepticism is very healthy, and I'm a big skeptic about more than 90% of the information out there on the subject, which the public needs to be skeptical. However, skepticism is not just blindly denying everything that's legitimate. For example, we have 3,500 cases where extraterrestrial vehicles have landed and left physical traces. We have 4,000 cases where they have been tracked on radar and seen by pilots. We have an enormous amount of photo and video evidence and physical evidence. And in our last project, brought out an actual body that is most likely not of human origin. So the question becomes, what is the metric for the evidence? Well, the evidence is actually overwhelming. There's more evidence for UFOs than there are for black holes, most of the theories in astrophysics, most of the evidence for most of the medicines you take. I'm speaking now as a trauma doctor. And yet, we have this blockage in the mainstream media and scientific establishment saying, where is the evidence? When I was 8 or 9, I saw one of these objects, broad daylight. There was a beautiful, seamless disk in a blue sky, back when the skies were very blue. And I was with some boys in the neighborhood, and we saw this, and I went, oh my God, they're real. We saw a UFO. Now, my parents said, oh, well, you're just a kid. But I became completely absorbed in this. So my interest in this goes back to my childhood. The Disclosure Project was an accident of history. In 1990, I formed the Center for the Study of Extraterrestrial Intelligence to form a diplomatic corps to make peaceful contact with these civilizations. Because once you conclude that they're real and they're of interstellar origin, the next question is, what are we going to do about it? And so I concluded what we should be doing about it is not militarizing the relationship, but having sort of a citizens' diplomacy effort, much like the Physicians for Social Responsibility, who were going to the Soviet Union to create a dialogue during the coldest days of the Cold War. There was no one at the United Nations or State Department or any foreign ministry dealing with it. So we started a set of protocols to make contact. And sure enough, we had some spectacular successes. This got kicked up to the intelligence community. So by 1992, I was getting visits from the head of Army Intelligence, people inside the National Security Agency, and other three-lettered agencies. My intention was never to get involved with trying to disclose this issue. My interest was in this whole concept of making contact for peaceful purposes to advance our civilization from a planetary civilization to an interplanetary civilization. That was really the heart of my sincere interest. But along that way, and eventually a man who was friends with the director of the CIA by the time Clinton became president, who said that you're going to be the first person to brief the director of Central Intelligence and the Clinton administration on this, because they have made inquiries and they have been lied to, which I did not believe. I mean, he was that blunt about it. This is really where I then went down the rabbit hole. And in this document from the Canadian government, the matter is the most highly classified subject in the United States government, rating higher than the H-bomb. That was the most top secret doomsday weapon at the time in development. And the second item, B, flying saucers exist, period. C, their modus operandi is unknown, but concentrated effort is being made by a small group headed by Dr. Vannevar Bush. And then D, the entire matter is considered by the United States authorities to be of tremendous significance. What is more sensitive than the development of the hydrogen bomb prior to its detonation? The UFO issue. A priori, therefore, the entire subject has been managed in a way from the 40s onward with extraordinary secrecy around it. The event at Roswell, because it resulted in the acquisition of materiel that could be studied, it created a sea change in the whole national security organization, because within weeks of that event, the CIA was formed. Within weeks, there was the formation of the Air Force, which was split off from the Army Air Force. It also led, however, the development of unacknowledged special access projects, which is why Eisenhower, even though he knew about the subject on a fairly deep level, had completely lost control of it by 1961 when he left office. You know, because you think of generals and you think of conservatives and Republicans as being very pro-military in business. But he's talking about the illegal part of it. He's not talking about the conventional military. And so the public has to understand there became to be this bifurcation, this separation between legitimate national security and military operations and the deep black programs that are unacknowledged. We're talking about the black budget, the deep black, super secret, unacknowledged budget that runs in the $100 to $200 billion a year. I'm being conservative. And if people think that the Congress and the President actually have a handle on this, they're gravely mistaken. They do not. This is where we get into the structure of secrecy. There's secrecy that is legal, and unfortunately, where Edward Snowden made his mistake was by disclosing secrets, no matter how inappropriate it might have been that they were going on, that were being managed legally that the President and Congress and the intelligence committees knew about. On the other hand, there's secrecy that is illegal. And these are the unacknowledged special access projects, USAPs, USAP for short. And in this document, first document that's on the briefing for President Obama's brief we put together that we gave to John Podesta, this document lists the compartmented operations out of the Nellis facility, what the public wrongly calls Area 51. I gave this document to the head of intelligence for the Joint Chiefs of Staff, Admiral Tom Wilson. Now this is J2. This is the guy who puts the intelligence briefings together for the Joint Chiefs of Staff of the United States of America. And he got hold of one of these compartments and he said, "Hello, I'm Admiral Tom Wilson. I want to be read into or briefed on this project." They said, "Yes, sir, we know who you are, and you don't have a need to know." You don't have a need to know. The head of intelligence for the Joint Chiefs of Staff. So this is where the military have been victims of the secrecy, because there are many generals and admirals and very good officers I've met with who have enormous responsibility that everyone, if you polled 1,000 people on the street, I think every single person would say something this sensitive they would know about, and if they didn't have knowledge about it, if they asked about it, they will be told. That is not true. So these unacknowledged special access projects do not care what your rank and position is. They care about one thing. Will you go along with their agenda? And this is exactly what happened when I met with Lord Hill Norton. The only thing he really wanted to know was, I was head of the Ministry of Defense, head of the Military Committee for NATO, head of MI5, MI6. Why wouldn't they have told me? And I said, well, sir, with all due respect, what would you have done if you'd found out that there was a project that was illegal, engaged in assassinations, that was keeping from not only our leaders and our constitutionally required oversight, technologies and information that would enable us to have a whole new civilization on this planet without pollution or dependency on Mideast oil or what have you? And he says, I wouldn't have stood for it for a bloody minute. And he was just in a rage about it. I said, that's why they didn't tell you. Within a couple months of me briefing the CIA director, I get a visit from one of Bill Clinton's good friends to my home who says, they love what you're recommending, that the president do executive orders to declassify and bring all this information out. This man comes to my house and says, they really think that's a great idea. The president won't do it, it's too dangerous. And I said, well, he's the president. He didn't want to be president. He shouldn't have taken on the responsibility and sworn an oath to the Constitution. And he says, yeah, but you don't understand. They don't think that they can protect the president. And I said, what do you mean? And he's sitting at the dinner table with my children. And he says, well, they're concerned that President Clinton will end up like Jack Kennedy. And I start laughing. I really started laughing out loud because I thought this is nonsense. This is like conspiracy kookville. He says, no, this is absolutely their concern, is that if he pushes on this, he is in mortal peril. There was deep concern that something this important would be kept out of the briefings for the president. My sort of coming of age, which was hard, anyway, it's hard talking about this. I'm trying to say, I was a young doctor, asked to do something like this. Sorry. I'm a doctor in an ER, taking care of shootings and stabbings and car wrecks. And I'm being asked to brief the CIA director on stuff because he and the president are being lied to? What? You know, are you... I said, are you fucking crazy? It was terrible. Frankly, it was devastating. Initially, I have to admit, the CIA director, I thought, to be honest with you, that he was sort of picking my brain to find out what I knew, as opposed to really not knowing. By the time the 3-hour meeting was over, it was quite clear that the emperor had no clothes. He later denied the meeting had happened for a briefing. This is a wonderful thing. Now, people say, how could he write this letter basically saying that this meeting and what I said about it was a distortion of the truth? I said, because he didn't realize there was a record beforehand. And thank God I saved the document that is the original invitation. And in that letter, it is explicit. I talked to Woolsey this morning, and he suggested getting together. There is an active attempt being made at lower levels of government to sabotage Project Starlight, which is the initiative I started and Lawrence Rockefeller helped fund to bring all these top secret people together and recommend these changes to the Clinton administration. And then he says, this group almost certainly has tapped your phones and is aware of most of the details of your plans. Remember, the most powerful people in the world will have a deep, compelling interest in our activities and will use everything at their disposal to effect their objective. Yeah, I thought, oh, come on. This is like a bad, conspiracy novel. Except this became my life. People who did not agree with this extraordinary secrecy and made trouble for them ended up having horrific things happen. If you tell anyone who is not in this room about this project, this bullet has your name on it, and it will find you. Interestingly, there was a man on my executive committee. He was a very well-known actor and singer named Burl Ives. And Burl Ives, he was a 33rd degree Mason. So all of you people who think that all these secret societies, everyone in it knows everything, they don't know anything. And he said to me, he says, we all know that Marilyn Monroe didn't die of an overdose. He said, do you know why they killed Marilyn?
Mr. President, the late Marilyn Monroe.
And I said, well, I didn't until I got this document. It's a virtual death warrant because she was found a couple days later. 3 August 1962, wiretap of telephone conversations between reporter Dorothy Kilgallen, who was looking into Roswell and other UFO issues, and her close friend Howard Rothberg. From wiretap of telephone conversation of Marilyn Monroe and Attorney General Bobby Kennedy. Rothberg discussed the apparent comeback of the subject with Kilgallen and the breakup with the Kennedys. This is referring to the fact that Marilyn Monroe had been having an affair with not one but both Kennedy brothers, and it was becoming conspicuous, so they broke it off. Rothberg indicated in so many words that she had secrets to tell, no doubt arising from her trysts with the President and the Attorney General. One such secret mentions the visit of the President at a secret air base for the purpose of inspecting things from outer space. Now, this is 1962. Kilgallen said that if the story is true, it would be a terrible embarrassment for Jack and his plans to have NASA put men on the moon. The subject repeatedly called the Attorney General and complained about the way she was being ignored by the President and his brother. Subject threatened to hold a press conference and would tell all. It's a tragic situation because she was an actress. She didn't understand the national security state and the viciousness of those who want to keep these sort of secrets. We've observed firsthand the intelligence community influencing the media when they're trying to cover this story. We have memoranda after memoranda after memoranda citing the psychological warfare and propaganda value of the subject. This is a very important thing for the public to understand. How do you keep something secret? You hide it in plain sight. So it's there. Everyone, I mean, there's 5% of the U.S. population have seen these objects. But you create an environment where the subject is so pilloried and ridiculed that no respectable scientist or doctor would want to be identified with it. And this officially was released by the CIA, talking about how they have people embedded in all the major media to change, alter, and affect stories to their benefit. You now have relationship with reporters from every underlined major wire service, newspaper, news weekly, and television network in the nation. In many instances, we have persuaded reporters to postpone, change, hold, or even scrap stories that could have adversely affected national security interests or jeopardized our sources and methods. And it goes on to then say that they have the same within academic circles. The man turned to me, and this is a board member of Time Life, and said, Dr. Greer, we basically are scribes taking dictation from the right hand of the king. The fourth estate is dead. The corruption of the media means that you have then undermined democracy and our basic constitutional protections. Because if you control the information flow through the elite media, and the only place you can get this information is through the tabloids, where they want it because it's discredited there, or on the internet where there's so much false information that's mixed in with the real information that you don't know what to make of it, there creates this complete confusion. And so we're sort of living in a Truman Show here. Everyone thinks we have a free press. We don't. We have a democratic process where all these sort of sensitive issues will be handled legally. We do not. And that we have an uncorrupted scientific establishment, which we do not, and which we will prove. Hynek eventually came clean and said we were there to debunk these cases, not to get to the truth and tell the public. And in this document, it says point blank that the people who are on this committee are answering and working with the CIA, but that can't be disclosed. And these are esteemed scientists in academic university settings. It says point blank, when there's a very strong piece of evidence, we need to set up something so we release certain type of balloons and film it so that it will look like that, to sort of debunk it. And we need to engage astronomers and amateur astronomers and set up a sighting situation where we show them some evidence and then show them how it's debunked. Dr. Condon is an objective scientist who is heading up a committee to tell the truth, because I'm a scientist. These guys are scientists second. They're humans first. And it says it cannot be allowed to be known that Dr. Condon et al. Are actually working with the CIA for these psychological warfare and spin factors. This is in these documents. This is not a theoretical case. This is why I say you form a committee when you want to kill something. And from the very first meeting I had with the Director of Central Intelligence, I didn't need to convince him that the UFOs were real. I mean, in fact, I pulled out all this dispositive evidence that Carl Sagan would want to see. And he said, I already know this is real. But I want to know why I, the CIA Director, James Woolsey, and the President of the United States aren't being told anything about it. The why is always the hardest question to ask, and nobody asks it. And I began to explain to him what it really is. It's a big technological question. They already exist. It's not like they even have to be invented. You and I, the taxpayers, have already paid trillions of dollars, literally, in super secret black budget funding to develop these systems. And all the literally hundreds of trillions of dollars in assets that are in coal, natural gas, uranium, nuclear power, public utilities, they're all obsolete. Many people would say, well, doesn't that mean the secrecy's been a good thing? I said, well, that would be like saying we should have never come out with the automobile because the horse and buggy manufacturers would have gone out of business, or come out with computers because Royal typewriters didn't get ahead of the curve and they went out of business. And there are still files on this issue classified, top secret, from 100 years ago for the same reasons, because the macroeconomic order of fossil fuels, petrodollar, handful of industrial elites and corporations would be completely transformed. But the folks who actually call the shots in the multi-trillion-dollar global economy, they don't want to see that happen. They don't want it today, and the likes of J.P. Morgan and others back 100 years ago didn't want it. And this was to the director of the FBI from the Department of Defense in a turf war trying to get that information and then lock it up. This is not a contested document. This has been officially released. If you take that on, you're going to run into the mother of all buzzsaws in terms of the national security state. There are 5,135, I believe it is, patents that have been confiscated under national security seizures. Now, these are just the patents. And this is what happened to a lot of the huge breakthrough technologies like Stan Meyer, who had a car running on water. A lot of people don't realize that Stan Meyer had a toroidal, a donut-shaped object that put out many times more energy than you had to put into it because it was tapping into this 0-point quantum vacuum energy field. That had a national security order on it before he even got it to patent. It was seized and shut down. Who's going to stop this from happening? The president doesn't know it's occurring. The Congress oversight committees have no idea what's going on. And you have these people who are in the deep national security state who basically do what they want. The problem is most of these inventors think that the world's going to beat a path to their door. Unfortunately, Murder Incorporated beats a path to their door first. Lockheed Martin Skunk Works and EG&G and Raytheon and E-Systems and MITRE Corporation and Booz Allen Hamilton, and on and on and on. I know many people who've worked in these programs. There were some very good folks, like Secretary Forrestal, and others who wanted to bring the subject out, but in a way where there would be contact that would be peaceful between humans and these civilizations. But there were other people who saw the big gold mine of militarism and war profiteering and the psychological warfare value. And in this document, the CIA director, Walter Smith, says, I am today transmitting to the National Security Council a proposal in which it is concluded that the problems connected with unidentified flying objects appear to have implications for psychological warfare as well as for intelligence and operations. We have to take a step back from all the jargon and all the paranoia in Star Wars movies for just a minute and realize that it's very easy to set up a false flag operation. And this is actually a well-known concept in military intelligence circles. We did it in the Gulf of Tonkin in Vietnam, where we exaggerated, if not completely staged, an attack on our naval vessels so we would stampede President Johnson and the Congress into vastly expanding the Vietnam conflict to benefit, guess who, the military-industrial complex and the war profiteers. Then you can look at Iraq. Concocted all kinds of false information about weapons of mass destruction, which Saddam Hussein did not have, and it was known in intelligence circles he didn't have. Fracture that whole part of the world, and now we have ISIS. So we have to realize the machinations and manipulations that go on behind the scenes leave us very vulnerable. And the big one is this one, where they could say, oh yes, the UFOs are real, but guess what? They're a threat, and we need to unite the world. Well, the only problem with that is that if you look at the technologies that permit for interplanetary and interstellar travel, it's 1,000 times more developed than a hydrogen bomb, which, if we were to have a massive exchange of nuclear weapons, would leave most of all life on Earth extinguished. Therefore, how could we possibly have armed conflict with another planetary system for more than a nanosecond and survive it? They know that we couldn't. But it's a way of manipulating the public through demagoguery of fear, jingoism, false nationalism, and creating a boogeyman out in space. They started doing all kinds of psychological warfare entrainment of the public by staging hoaxed events such as cattle mutilations. Oh, it's a flying saucer that did that. It's a covert paramilitary program, human. So if you wanted to start indoctrinating people into a false threat from outer space that Werner von Braun warned us about. You would start staging events that look alien, but that are completely man-made, that are scary and scare the hell out of people. Enter stage left, you got these sort of anti-gravity devices with creatures that look like ETs, that are actually man-made robotic systems. They're called programmed life forms. And you start doing select interfaces with the public, and then it makes it out through the movie industry and the UFO lore and the internet and what have you, and it starts creating the specter of a threat. The fact that you and I are still breathing the free air of Earth is abundant testimony to their restraint and non-hostility. Now the question is, how are these civilizations viewing us? Are they perceiving human civilization as a threat? And the answer is yes, because I believe we've reached a point where we're a threat not only to our planet and each other, but we're also developing weapon systems that are potentially a threat in space. The most dangerous thing going on the planet today isn't ISIS. It's not Iraq. It's not Russia. It's not China. It's a out-of-control, covert group that is not being overseen by the people, the Congress, or the President, who have developed these technologies and are recklessly using them to track and target extraterrestrial vehicles. The result of this is that we're in a crisis that is unacknowledged, ironically, because these projects are unacknowledged. We better not get this one wrong, because this could be a threat to all life on Earth if we are reckless with this issue. We need wise elders that are humans dealing with this situation, and the sociopaths that are in control of those programs can't be allowed to speak for planet Earth and for humanity. One of the more hopeful events that happened over the last decade was what I call the French Initiative. I get a letter from the Ministry of Defense, and it's dated 16th of January 2007, urgent, and it's signed by Admiral Pierre Morin. And he was in charge of providing briefings on this issue for then President of the French Republic, Sarkozy. They learned protocols to make contact with these civilizations for peaceful engagement. So here you have a major country, a nuclear power, making a commitment to do this. And we eventually go to France, and under the cover of a quasi-public event, the Admiral and his assistants are there, and we do the protocols for contact. And they track ET craft coming overhead at 200,000 kilometers an hour. But what it shows is that governments around the world can actually do a lot if they wanted to break the mold of secrecy and do something helpful. And this is the proof that that's happened with a major country. This is arguably the most important UFO document in history. The irony of it is I couldn't disclose it for quite a while until that president, Sarkozy, was out of office and these folks were not in harm's way. The technologies will change the macroeconomic system. Because visualize for a moment, you're at your home, all your power needs are being provided from one of these zero-point or quantum vacuum energy systems. Your car is running, never has to be plugged in. You then can have agriculture and manufacturing locally that has very little cost to it. And this is not just in the U.S., but in places that aren't yet developed, so-called third world or developing world. They're going to leapfrog right over the smokestack industries and go to high-tech, real high-tech, just like they've skipped over telephone lines and gone to smartphones. This will be a tide that will lift off ships. The world will be increasingly interconnected, and yet on the local level, be completely self-sufficient, every village, every home. And this is something that is the biggest change economically in the history of the human race. And this is why it's time for the people to lead the whole ending of the secrecy and do the disclosure.
One of my biggest disappointments over the last 25 years is those who lack the courage of their convictions. If 1% of the people who I've talked with, met with, or briefed had that courage, this would have all been fixed long ago. I've always told them, if you won't do it, I will. So here goes.
Evidence. So where's the beef on the UFO issue? In fact, we have so much evidence that Dr. J. Allen Hynek, who was in charge of Project Blue Book for the Air Force, stated that it's an embarrassment of riches. We have so much. Roswell's almost become a joke because there's so much myth and narrative around it. But if you look at the Guy Hotel document, it was a field agent sent to J. Edgar Hoover. 3 so-called flying saucers had been recovered in New Mexico. Each one was occupied by 3 bodies of human shape, but only 3 feet tall. It's become the #1 document viewed on the FBI website after we released this. The question is, who are people like Carl Sagan and before him Professor Donald Menzel? It turns out that Sagan, in his early career, actually spoke and wrote about UFOs in a way that was affirmative, that it was legitimate. After he was threatened by the intelligence community and blackmailed, he then began to debunk the issue. And yet, we have this blockage in the mainstream media and scientific establishment saying, where is the evidence? When I was 8 or 9, I saw one of these objects, broad daylight. There was a beautiful, seamless disk in a blue sky, back when the skies were very blue. And I was with some boys in the neighborhood, and we saw this, and I went, oh my God, they're real. We saw a UFO. Now, my parents said, oh, well, you're just a kid. But I became completely absorbed in this. So my interest in this goes back to my childhood. The Disclosure Project was an accident of history. In 1990, I formed the Center for the Study of Extraterrestrial Intelligence to form a diplomatic corps to make peaceful contact with these civilizations. Because once you conclude that they're real and they're of interstellar origin, the next question is, what are we going to do about it? In that way, and eventually a man who was friends with the director of the CIA by the time Clinton became president, who said that you're going to be the first person to brief the director of Central Intelligence and the Clinton administration on this, because they have made inquiries and they have been lied to, which I did not believe. I mean, he was that blunt about it. This is really where I then went down the rabbit hole. And in this document from the Canadian government, the matter is the most highly classified subject in the United States government, rating higher than the H-bomb. That was the most top secret doomsday weapon at the time in development. And the second item, B, flying saucers exist, period. C, their modus operandi is unknown, but concentrated effort is being made by a small group headed by Dr. Vannevar Bush. And then D, the entire matter is considered by the United States authorities to be of tremendous significance. Skepticism is very healthy, and I'm a big skeptic about more than 90% of the information out there on the subject, which the public needs to be skeptical. However, skepticism is not just blindly denying everything that's legitimate. For example, we have 3,500 cases where extraterrestrial vehicles have landed and left physical traces. We have 4,000 cases where they have been tracked on radar and seen by pilots. We have an enormous amount of photo and video evidence and physical evidence. And in our last project, brought out an actual body that is most likely not of human origin. So the question becomes, what is the metric for the evidence? Well, the evidence is actually overwhelming. There's more evidence for UFOs than there are for black holes, most of the theories in astrophysics, most of the evidence for most of the medicines you take. I'm speaking now as a trauma doctor. So I concluded what we should be doing about it is not militarizing the relationship, but having sort of a citizens diplomacy effort, much like the Physicians for Social Responsibility, who are going to the Soviet Union to create a dialogue during the coldest days of the Cold War. There was no one at the United Nations or State Department or any foreign ministry dealing with it. So we started a set of protocols to make contact, and sure enough, we had some spectacular successes. This got kicked up to the intelligence community. So by 1992, I was getting visits from the head of Army Intelligence, people inside the National Security Agency, and other three-lettered agencies. My intention was never to get involved with trying to disclose this issue. My interest was in this whole concept of making contact for peaceful purposes to advance our civilization from a planetary civilization to an interplanetary civilization. That was really the heart of my sincere interest. But along that